The war between Russia and Ukraine wages on unabated. Yesterday, the Biden administration's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, said Russia is turning to Iran for help to beef up its weapons arsenal. The White House believes Iran will give hundreds of drones to Russia, and Putin is set to visit Tehran next week. Senior fellow and military expert at Defense Priorities, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, joins us now to discuss. So what is, the latest in Russia, Ukraine, and, why are they turning to Iran? Why is Russia turning to Iran for help at this point?
Yeah, they're in the Russians are in what's called kind of an operational pause at the moment after taking the majority of what I refer to as the northern shoulder of the Donbas with the Slavyansk with the northern part of it where Severodonetsk and Lysychansk were, which Russia took last week. They are basically regenerating their forces and preparing to go on to Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, which is about 15-20 kilometers further to the east. Further to the west from those original places. And the active part has basically slowed down, but the artillery continues to go in quite heavily. But the big change, and really the biggest news, is the introduction of the HIMARS rocket launchers given to Ukraine by the United States, and some MLRS given another rocket launcher by the UK to Ukraine. And they have had really some pretty noteworthy successes in that they have taken out allegedly up to 24 ammo depots in the far rear of the Russian area of their artillery ammo, which is so important because if they knock that out, then there's a lot less artillery that can fall on the Ukrainians. That is a temporary situation which Russia will address and probably fix by dispersing their dumps. But it is quite noteworthy and something that's we're going to be keeping a lot more of a watch on.
Is it your sense that is the country being systematically leveled from east to west as the Russian forces advance? Because you see photos and things of life being somewhat normal in some parts of Ukraine, and I think it's just hard for the average American to get a sense of even, is the whole country being destroyed? Is the fighting very much confined to just this one part of the country? What is your analysis of that?
Yeah, what happened in the first phase? Russia thought they were going to just kind of basically come in and demonstrate this large armored force and drive down roads. And they thought they were going to scare the Ukrainians into submission and they were going to give up. And instead, they suffered egregious casualties and destruction of their forces because they basically used none of the standard modern military tactics to protect your force. And they paid a huge price for that. Now then, they have said, OK, we're not going to risk our troops like that anymore. And they completely moved the force back over to the far east in the Donbas area. And they are operating on a new tactic now, which is lead heavily with firepower, artillery, rockets, and airstrikes. And yes, just as you suggested, in their areas, they are maximizing the use of firepower and leveling anything in front of them, which they've done in Mariupol, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, and in quite a number of other cities that's smaller around the area. And they just methodically move forward, just destroying all of the Ukrainian troops as well as the cities. And now then they're getting ready to move to the next target set in that.
So my understanding is that the weapons that Iran will be providing are largely unmanned aerial vehicles, namely weapons-capable drones. Can you talk about the strategic significance of Russia increasing its ability to use drone warfare?
Yeah, this is actually one of the biggest surprises that I had at the outset of the war, because given how drone technology had been developing over the years prior to the onset of this war, my expectation was that Russia was, following that trend and was at the forefront of it. But apparently, they did not put enough focus on their own drone capacity, whether in development or production. And so when the war kicked off, they were kind of behind the eight ball, so to speak. But now then they recognize, because even Ukraine has had some success with the Turkish Bakhtiar 2 drone. But now then, those are not quite as stealthy, and the Russians have been pretty good at shooting those down. The versions from Iran, on the other hand, they have really been elevating theirs since really 2002 and forward. And beginning in about 2015, 2018 timeframe, they become even more sophisticated. And you may recall that in September 2019, allegedly Iran-backed Houthi rebels attacked an Aramco oil facility in Saudi Arabia with precision pinpoints targeting that none of the air defenses could knock out, and that changed the course of that war. And so I suspect that this is the kind of drone that Russia's going to want here, because it can go through any air defenses and it has pinpoint accuracy. And if they get hundreds of those things, that could have a big negative impact on the Ukrainian war effort as well.
Well, do you expect that to be met with more escalation in terms of weapons and economic support sent to Ukraine from the United States? And if so, when does this arms race end?
Yeah, that is the. I mean, this is what you're seeing already, because we amped up with the HIMARS, because that elevated categorically to a new weapon system caliber, and then you see Russia meeting that with, they're getting external support also on a sophisticated level. And as each of these has its impact on the other, they will both seek to continually to give themselves an additional advantage. And yes, the escalation part and the potential for expanding the war has been my concern, as I've said on your network many times since the very beginning, and remains so now, because none of these things actually reach towards an ultimate settlement of the war. They're not going to end it, but they will increase the killing and the destruction and expand the war.
Yeah, and Jake Sullivan said yesterday, I believe it was Jake Sullivan, speaking for the Biden administration, that this will go on, the U.S. support for Ukraine will go on for as long as it takes. That was the literal phrase they used. I discussed it earlier in the program. If we're going to aid them as long as it takes, and it might take either forever or it might just not be possible to have Ukraine win, barring a much more significant U.S. involvement, perhaps, the end of the cloak and dagger phase, a phase where we're just the U.S. is directly confronting Russia. Is that, which could be a catastrophic nuclear kind of situation, but is that really what it would take, for Ukraine to truly knock Russia out of its country? Because it seems doubtful, increasingly doubtful, that they could do that without a lot more help, is I think what we're seeing.
Yeah, the truth is, which I wrote recently in the National Security Organization, 1945, there is no rational military path for Ukraine to win. I mean, these things are basically this, like the HIMARS and some of these other support we've given them is going to increase the cost to Russia in their advance, but it's not even going to stop the advance, much less allow them to have an offensive, which they're talking about as early as next month, which doesn't make any military sense because they don't have the forces to be able to do that. So all these things do is to continue ramping up the cost, both to Ukraine and to the West and the United States in particular. Specifically to your point there, I mean, the question is, how long can the United States go on? I mean, we can't continue to provide all of the logistics support, the rockets, the maintenance capability, and the launchers themselves indefinitely. I mean, that starts to get into our own inventory and affect our own national security by weakening our conventional capacity. And look, you see that with a lot of these economic indicators coming up even later this summer in the United States and the West, it's going to become increasingly difficult for Americans to understand why we're giving billions of dollars every month when our own economy is starting to have problems. And I'm not sure that that's something we can sustain over the long term.
That's interesting. So by giving them so many weapons, there would come a point where we're really depleting our own stockpile, and we don't have an overflowing or an infinite supply of these things. But that would be a real possibility at some point.
Well, yeah, because look, we're not at war, so we don't have a wartime industrial capacity right now. But the Ukrainian people are asking us to just give them this nonstop supply of artillery rounds, of rockets, of all the support that we're giving them in all these other categories, and that's depleting our stocks because we don't have the rapid and expanded production capacity to replace those. That's something that very few people are talking about, but over time, and probably not too many more months, that's going to start to become a real issue.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. We appreciate it.
Always my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Stick around. Team Rising will join us next.